Kayla, it's great to be back on the other side of the table again.
Thank you, Pete. It is. Back in the studio.
So tell me, what sort of piqued your interest over the last few weeks?
Yeah, I'm gonna mention a bit of a viral one at the moment. I'm currently just finishing off Mel Robbins' The Let Them Theory. It's been sort of doing the rounds on the socials, and I picked it up a couple of weeks ago and thought, I'm always into this sort of stuff. I love Mel Robbins. I love her podcast. I love what she puts out on social media. So I thought, let's read the book. It's the first time I've read one of her books. She's written a few now, but I've never picked up one of her books. And this one is absolutely brilliant. Essentially, it's about, you know, people are going to do what they want in life, and the way that you are going to get through that is just to let it happen.
I was actually going to ask you because maybe I'm in different social circles, but hadn't heard of Mel Robbins before. But I'll definitely make sure to check that out. And look, one that's piqued my interest is an oldie and a goodie, and it's called Customer Magic. So
Okay.
it's really almost an inside story of the Macquarie Telecom, or now Macquarie Technology Group. So they pivoted their business many years ago to really focus on that customer NPS about being the most important number. And it walks through the journey about how they've leveraged that every decision that they make in the business is all about the customer. So, yeah, a great read, Customer Magic.
I love businesses that focus on that customer experience and the NPS scoring and things like that. It's definitely something I think we'll dive into at a later point in time. But today we're talking about M&A. Now, I'm excited for this because I have been on the journey with you twice through this, both times. And I've seen, well, actually, I came into the Warty business just as the first one was happening. And obviously was with you through the MOQ acquisition, and you were spearheading that. And this is a really hot topic in the industry. I think it is. I've never seen it this red hot before from an M&A perspective. So many businesses are going through, I suppose, I'm sure you'll come up with a technical term for it, but the right shaping that it takes to be acquired and what you've got to do. And we're going to unpack that today and what that means, because I wasn't aware that it was actually quite an extensive, brutal process, like a 12-month process for businesses to right shape and to be considered for acquisition. But can we start with, you've been through this twice. What was your experience like? I really want to hear that.
Well, I used to actually have hair before this whole process started, but I might actually jump in and sort of change sort of the topic, because let's face it, it's actually not mergers and acquisitions. It's really just acquisitions. As much as organisations say we're going to take organisation A and B and bring them together, it's never like that.
True.
There's always a dominant player in the relationship, and it is definitely, truly an acquisition with that. So I think it's never a joining of equals, and I think that's really important, because that also, psychologically how you go into that journey is really important as well, because at some stage, you as a business owner, you're going to give up control, and being willing to be able to give up control is important with that. And look, I've been on the journey twice in a large way, and done a few smaller ones along the way with other businesses that I've been involved in. And it is definitely way more effort than you expect to go into that. So the background for me is that I sold the Warty business, and that was driven by a catalyst. And I think, like a lot of business owners, there's typically a catalyst that they reach that makes them start to think about, well, maybe I want to crystallize some of all of the hard work that I've done. But there's no right or wrong answer. Is, selling a business versus not selling a business. There's nothing wrong with keeping it. And I often describe in business is a bit like being a watermelon farmer. You can either go and make the capital investments in order to improve that farm and then sell the farm, or you can go and sow those watermelon seeds every year and have a really successful business that you consistently get a dividend from. And I think the key as a business owner is understanding which of those are you. Are you looking to then go and get that ongoing consistent yield, or are you looking to shape the business for sale? Because they're two very, very different strategies and approaches that you take in regards to that. So that's probably the first takeaway to think about is, what shape business are you? Because, when you're then looking to then sell is often you're needing to right size, paint the fence, get the equipment improved there, making sure that it's not just your mum and daughters that are working in the back of house on the farm, but have those processes and structure in place that is needed for an ongoing concern, that when it's, private business or just your business, no one really cares how the watermelons are growing as long as you get a great outcome there. But an acquirer will definitely care how those watermelons and the process that you follow as part of that due diligence piece that you go through. And look, for me, I think the most important thing that I did, and from talking to a number of other colleagues and people that have sold their business, is getting an external advisor.
Yeah, 100%.
And so that advisor does a number of things that enable you to complete a transaction. And first thing is sometimes a little bit of a reality check. We all think our baby is more beautiful than it really is. And our businesses are exactly the same. I think we've all got aspirations of achieving absolutely amazing multiples. But sometimes there's a reality check, and that advisor can help us then work through, well, how do we then shape that business for the ideal acquirer? Like, where's the important things that we should be focusing on in regards to that? And look, we went through the process a couple of times. Like, we didn't, we'd, like a lot of people, there's a lot of incoming inquiries that are coming from the market.
With the Wardy business?
Yeah, well, we went through thinking about selling previously. Like, we'd got some incoming offers, whether that was someone connecting on LinkedIn or, phoning up from a private equity firm. And we went through that and realised that we weren't quite in the right shape at that time. But what the advisor allowed us to do is then go, well, these are the things really to focus on, so that when the next inquiry comes through, that we're in a better shape. But really, the ultimate catalyst for me was the birth of my first daughter. It made me sort of think about the world a little bit differently. And some business owners might be thinking that they're getting towards the end, towards retirement, and that's the catalyst for them. It might be that there's changes in their personal circumstances. There's all sorts of reasons that people come to that decision to sell their business. And I think the key is getting to that decision point. And then once you've got to that decision point, getting an advisor to come in to help support you. And we'll dig in, I'm sure, a lot more about, the process that someone goes through. But I think the first thing is just going, are you up for sale or are you not? Because both of those are an appropriate answer.
Yeah, you've always said that both businesses, if you're shaping the business for sale and rapidly, that's okay. But if you're also able to, be out of your business and reaping the dividends from that business, that's also a very valid reason to have a business, right?
But I think the key is that great businesses are always able to be sold. So don't necessarily focus
True.
on the sell part. How do you focus on just creating a great operational business? Because in any market, that business will be worth a lot more than any other business.
Yeah, 100%. So you went through the Wardy acquisition, and that catalyst was the birth of Lucy.
Lucy, yep.
What was that like? So you had a few inquiries, I'm assuming, before that, and then there was obviously the offer that you accepted and you went through. What was the due diligence process like? Because you said, I remember I wasn't part of the Wardy due diligence, but I was part of the MOQ due diligence. And I remember you being very stressed through that process. So was that, why is it stressful? Like, what can people expect from that?
Look, I think the first thing is to expect you're going to start working two jobs.
Yeah.
You're going to have the BAU, just keeping the business running, and you're then going to have another job, which is then working through that due diligence. And especially because often the buyer has a lot more people on their side. They've got probably a top-tier accounting firm, a top-tier legal firm, tax advisors, all of these people that are asking for information in a very, very short, compressed time frame in regards to that. But as a business owner, you also need to keep the BAU operational piece, and often it's just you or a very small component of your team that are even aware of what's going on because of the need to then have confidentiality associated with that transaction. And not all transactions complete. Sometimes they fall over halfway through for various different reasons. And, you want to make sure that you haven't impacted that asset of yours, being the business, as part of that process. But to sort of maybe take a step back and go, well, what actually is that journey? There's two approaches. One is that someone comes to you and you then sell. But like an auction, you often want to have multiple parties that are involved in that because, it's that classic where you put up a house, you put the price for it, but how do you then drive more activity out of that? And that's where an advisor comes in as well, because often an advisor will have what's called a mandate, where you will give them the mandate to effectively take the business to a number of different people.
Gotcha.
As part of that, what they'll normally do is they will create a teaser. They'll normally create like a code name for it. Like it could be for the Wardy business was Project Luca. I love Luca in Italy, and that was always our plan, was to spend some time in Luca. So hence Project Luca was the name we had for the Wardy transaction. So normally a one-page teaser will be created that sort of describes the business in high-level terms that no one can really read who it is that's for sale, but there's enough in there to get them interested. That teaser will get sent out to interested parties. We sent ours out to about 60 organisations at that point in time. We had about 20 come back to us that then wanted to know more information. So they would sign a non-disclosure agreement at that point in time. And then there was an IM, or an information memorandum, that then provided more detail about our business. So everything from who our customers were, to number of heads, to revenue, to profitability, all the insights in the business. From there, we then had about 12 people that then wanted to then go and through presentations for us to then go and present the business to. So, often that time you are spending so much activity and energy because of how much work that's associated directly with that.
So were you going out and doing presentations to the
doing the dog and pony show.
Okay.
So, and some of those are one-off presentations. Some of them are then, 2 or 3 presentations to potential acquirers.
And so that advisor, you obviously had engaged them before they even did up the little one-page teaser and you were even ready for sale. How long had you engaged them before you were ready to do that?
So one of the things we worked out as we'd gone through this process previously is the need to bring external advisors in. We brought a leader in that actually helped work with us around putting the right process, help actually growing our leadership team, doing a number of components. They had also then worked with then the sell side advisor as well. So for us, that journey was really a 2-year journey that we undertook in order to reshape our business to then be able to then get the maximum return.
So exactly the point that we brought up at the beginning of the episode, it's not a quick thing, right? You can't just go up for sale tomorrow like a house.
Yeah, look, it can be.
Okay.
But just like a house, if you want to then sell it really quickly, you may not necessarily maximize the outcome that you're looking for.
Yeah, gotcha. And so I guess let's skip ahead then to what can business owners expect? Because I'm sure that there's a few business owners listening to our podcast who are probably maybe even reaching retirement age, or even just they may want to sell their business for whatever reason. What was life like after you sold Wardy? And look, you were maybe the exception to this because you continued in the MOQ business. But it wasn't just like hand the keys over, jump on the boat and, see you later, guys, I'm out. Like, it's not like that, is it? It's very much involved still.
Look, it's not. And look, once again, it's how you shape the transaction with the potential acquirer. And Sometimes the acquirer doesn't want you around as part of the deal, but typically to maximize the value is there's an earnout piece.
Yeah.
And that earnout piece is really about the buyer de-risking the acquisition, because if the key leader leaves, all of a sudden what's to then make sure that customers don't leave, team members don't leave, when they're looking for where the bodies are buried, that there's someone to tell them where the bodies are buried, all of those things. And that earnout can be, 12 years, so 12 months.
Oh, wow, 12 years.
12 months, 2 years. And that's typical of what you would expect. There are sometimes certain transactions that are longer than that, but, expect to be doing 12 to 2 years as part of that earnout process.
Yeah, again, so not a quick process.
And having a boss is also a different scenario, that's for sure. So I certainly, embraced, but also was challenged by having a boss as well. You mean I can't go and sign off all of my own travel at the front of the plane anymore?
Yeah, and I think that's, and we've spoken about this before, right? A lot of the people listening to the podcast, the business owners, they've started their business because, similar to us, they wanted that freedom to be able to go and do what they wanted, when they wanted, spend their money how they wanted. And then to go through an acquisition process and go back to almost as an employee, regardless of your, I guess, rank in that organisation, it can be quite challenging and jarring, right?
Look, a number of my friends have gone through acquisition processes, and a number of them didn't make it through the earn-out journey.
Wow.
They got 12 months in, one even got 18 months in a 2-year journey, and just said enough's enough. Wow. They are prepared to leave money on the table because they just couldn't work for somebody else. And that was either because the acquirer restricted in what they could do. They thought, there was no way for them to possibly achieve the earn-out because other decisions were made in the business. And another colleague was just I just hate having a boss other than my wife.
So it's usually a percentage in that earn-out, isn't it? So you would receive, I suppose, a decent chunk up front, and then to receive the rest of that, you would need to stay with the organisation and achieve certain outcomes. Is that right?
Correct, yeah. So typically you expect around 2/3 of the transaction up front and then another third after that earn out. Depending on who the acquirer is, if you're being acquired by sort of a larger, a big four, for example, that's a third, a third, a third. So a third up front, a third after 12 months, a third after 2 years. So there are definitely different constructs, but they're all based on hitting specific objectives and specific targets. And often a transaction will be done around what's called forward earnings, which is effectively going, the business is earning $5 million today. Based on that growth, we expect it to be maybe $6 million after 2 years. So the valuation that somebody's buying on is that forward valuation of the $6 million of revenue. So you need to be able to achieve that. You need to have been able to move the needle from 5 mil to 6 mil in order to maximise and realise all of the potential of the transaction.
Yeah, wow. Okay. It is a really complicated process, isn't it?
It is complicated, but it's also complicated because often people haven't gone through it before.
Absolutely not.
And it's like anything when you go through it the first time, there's all of these 3-letter acronyms and new words and working cap facilities and all these things that, people then start to look at. And one of the classic ones that often gets people frustrated is that working capital adjustment. So effectively that working capital adjustment is done on the last day or first day, depending on how the transaction's structured. And that's basically where some money's taken off the table in order to keep the business running. Yeah. Because, you can't just sell the business and not have any money in the bank account to continue to operate. And so there's an adjustment that's then needed to be done off the transaction price. And often because there's a lot of heightened emotion at that point in time, both from excitement, but also that pressure of just finalising everything, that's often an area where people have a lot of argy-bargy about.
Mm-hmm. And also, to flip it on its head, in one of my other businesses that I have with my husband, we were about to acquire another business. The deal actually fell through about 20 days before we were about to take over. But I remember calling because it was the first time we were obviously on the acquirer side, and I remember it was the first time I'd ever been through this process or looked at this process in detail, both from a selling perspective or an acquisition perspective. And I remember calling you going, hey, can you just, is this right? You have absolute a right to zero out the bank accounts before you hand over the keys. That is not something I realised. And I remember saying to you, what do you mean I'm not going to have any working capital to keep the business running? I have to put that in myself. And it was like, yeah, that is something that you can do if you are selling, and it is something the seller can do if you're acquiring.
Yeah,
which I didn't realise.
Yeah, and that's where that external advisor really comes in. And I often also think about the external advisor as the good cop, bad cop.
Yeah.
You need to have a working relationship with the seller to the buyer, because you have to work with them at some stage down the track, even if it's only a short period of time. But sometimes what the advisor can do is then have the hard conversations about, hang on, that tax advice, I think you're being a little bit heavy-handed with that. So, or, if you keep pushing down that path, well, the transaction's off.
Mm-hmm.
And as opposed to then as the seller, you go, no, that's all good. He must have got that lost in translation. In the back end, going to the advisor, push him harder next time.
Yeah, wow. It's a game. It's an absolute game show.
It is a game. And I think what makes it complicated is that every deal is different.
Yeah.
There's organisations that are looking to do roll-ups where they're acquiring a number of MSPs and rolling that up into a single brand. There's others that then are a house of brands where they operate individually. They're not being rolled up in any shape or form. They're very much a buy and hold style play, like Evergreen, for example, out of the US, that's very active in the local market at the moment. That's their approach, is buy great businesses and hold them because they'll continue to grow over time. There's others that are like private equity. They'll come in and buy a portion of the business to allow you to take some risk off the table, but then will want you to continue to grow in an accelerated fashion as a result of investing that capital. And so what makes it different is that you might even be sitting down and having a beer with a colleague that's gone through an acquisition, and it's very different to yours.
100%. It is so different for every person. It's like every business is different, so every deal is going to be different, right?
100%. But it's also then thinking about that, some of the things to think about is your revenue mix. Different revenue has different valuations.
Yeah,
so if you're predominantly largely a hardware-based business or selling a lot of infrastructure and licensing, that's going to have a very different valuation to someone that's got high density of reoccurring managed services revenue. And when most businesses are looking to make an acquisition in the IT space, it's often driven by how much recurring revenue you have directly in that. And one of the things to think about is there's this misnomer in the marketplace about length of managed services contracts. So often people think they need to have 3-year contracts for them to be valid as recurring revenue. In the Wardy business, we had a significant part of our business recurring revenue, and we allowed our customers to cancel at any stage with 30 days notice. So effectively, we had no long tenure in those contracts, but it didn't impact the valuation at all because there was stickiness that we could demonstrate with those customers.
How did you demonstrate that?
Simply the fact that it was like Hotel California. Once they were in, they never left.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, it's a bit wild, isn't it? Like this whole process, and it's definitely not something for the faint-hearted. I'm sure you would say that. Why do you think that? And I've got a view on this. Why do you think this is such a hot thing in our industry at the moment? Like, I just am seeing so many businesses being acquired. They're being going through the process. They're being looked at by the likes of Evergreen. It's just that, like, I look at a company like Evergreen and go, they're just looking, they're just out hunting. Like, you see them at the conferences and they are there to hunt for. Why is that the case? Why do you think that is at the moment? Because my view is that everyone's looking for a competitive advantage, and that one little business that they might acquire might give them that competitive advantage. Is that what you think it is as well, or what's your view?
My view is it's no different to what it's been for the last 15 years in the IT space. I think one of the things is the transaction size has certainly then reduced in regards to that ideal size of business. Traditionally, it was 10 million and above, which is where most of that acquisition activities happened in that sort of mid-market space. What has happened and changed is not the amount of activity, but the fact that that activities then come into the lower end, the $5 million mark around that.
That makes sense.
And sort of that entry point has changed in regards to what acquirers are looking for. And I think in any space, it's, technology continues to grow. The amount of technology that organisations need to consume and the amount of reliance that they have on their technology partners, whether they're a TSP or an MSP or an SI or a VAR or insert three-letter acronym here, that reliance there. But also because in IT businesses, there's often a large amount of recurring revenue. So that predictability that exists inside of that. So that's why investment businesses love that, is because they can make an acquisition and it continues to grow over time.
Yeah. What is your top 3 tips for anyone listening that is like, I'm not sure if I want to sell, I think I do, but the process sounds harrowing? What's your message for them?
I think the first thing to think about is, what is it that you want out of a transaction? So just simply thinking about, well, what is that number that's going to make me happy? Mm-hmm. And when you think about that number, also think about, well, what are the tax implications? Because what you get paid is not necessarily what you're going to be putting in your bank account in regards to that. By the time you pay lawyers and accountants and other people, and then pay our good friend the tax office, how much is going to be left, and is that then sufficient for what you're looking for? So I think understanding what the number is, because once you have a number, you've got a goal and you can work towards that goal and that target.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Anything else for people that are looking to be acquired or even looking to acquire? We haven't actually really spoken about that.
Well, I think, really that is where we're seeing a lot of activity, is not just from the larger end of town, but also those mid-sized MSPs acquiring smaller MSPs. And that's really driven by customer acquisition.
Yeah.
Finding customers in the market is often very tough. And the fastest way to be able to get there is to make an acquisition. So the ability to go and pick up another 40 or 50 customers, takes time to do that organically. But an acquisition is the ability to bolt those in very, very quickly. So that's the catalyst that's driving that at the smaller end for sure.
And that was one of the strategies at MOQ, was to acquire businesses that complemented the MOQ business but allowed us to tap into new streams of customers.
Yeah, being able to add complementary, strings to the bow. So, for example, MOQ started off as a traditional IT infrastructure business that then merged with a integration business to be able to add a digital capability, then grew through acquiring then managed services businesses, specialist data and AI businesses, specialist virtual desktop infrastructure businesses. So, over time, but also as part of that acquisition strategy, also looked at geolocation. So how do you then reach a new geographic location, through that piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, definitely. Fabulous. Well, thank you, Pete. That was very insightful. I mean, I think we could talk about this all day, really, like the process and everything that you've gone through from both times. But, we've only got so long in one podcast episode. But I think if you are interested in learning more about this process, because I do think that it is something that a lot of people are exploring, let us know. We can unpack it, potentially get an advisor on the podcast to talk about this in some of the detail. And, I would love to sort of unpack this a little bit further. So if it's something that interests you, let us know. Shoot us a message on LinkedIn or comment on one of the socials, and we take it all in.
Yeah, look forward to those comments, because I'm sure we're going to revisit this topic again.
Perfect. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Kayla.